taught in the curriculum. Malak is a girl, and her grandfather, that was an activity. The role, Malak asks, she doesn't know about something, and the grandfather answers. Even there is equity, male and female, but the rule was the female doesn't know and the male knows. Another example, Hani is a boy and his mother. Hani and his mother. The same thing, the rule that the mother asks, she doesn't know, and Hani answers. There is equity, male and female, but the role was biased to the male. Here, Ali boy and his father, the role Ali asks, and the father answers. Here is a family discussion. Saeed is a boy, and the discussion between Saeed and his parents. The role Saeed asked, he doesn't know. The mother answered once, but the father is the main reference for all the answers. One example was found in the book that Rana is a girl and her brother Samir. The role Samir asks, he doesn't know, and Rana answers. There is equity, male and female, but the role is different. There is no justice. There's an example of injustice. Even there is equity between male and female. Other aspects of equity, rights and responsibilities or duties were found the same. It's okay. Equity of a place equity. City, village, and camp were treated as the same. This is equity. This is a photo of the unit of social relations. What the textbook defined the social relation. It is a relation between a group of people based on respect, ethics, appreciation, cooperation, equity, and justice. Is this right? Is this definition meets the right definition of social relations? Not very bad. What is the bad thing? Wrote the last two words is equity and justice. Where's the bad thing?
I think it's okay.
It's okay.
It covers all the good relation that connect people.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like it's a group of people.
Uh-huh.
Maybe this.
Hamza?
No girls.
No girls. Look at the photo.
Oh,
Look at the photo. Where is the equity and justice? Thank you.
على التكست.
Thank you again, Dr. Suheil. So Dr. Suheil talked about very important points regarding our situation here in Palestine. الدكتور سهيل حكى عن نقاط مهمة كثير بالنسبة لمجتمعنا هون في فلسطين. وحكى عنها من خلال برضه منهاجنا، وفرجاكم كيف بعض الأمثلة بالنسبة للعدالة والمساواة، كيف إنه إحنا عندنا ممكن مساواة بس ما بيكون في عدالة، وخصوصا لما تيجي للجندر رولز اللي هو بالنسبة كيف بين الذكر والأنثى، كيف إنه إحنا ما في عنا مساواة، بالرغم من إحنا ممكن بنحكي بطريقة دايركت إنه إحنا في عنا مساواة، بس لما نطلع بشكل indirect بطريقة غير مباشرة بتلاقي إنه ما في مساواة. Thank you very much. Now we're going to open it for questions and answers. We are running out of time, so we can have around 15 minutes for questions and answers.
Just 3 questions, because we need
3 questions.
Yes.
Okay, I thought because you just moved the time ahead like for 30 minutes, that's why I thought about it. Okay, fine. If we can have 3 questions, أي حدا بحب يسأل نعطي مجال ل3 أسئلة عندنا السبيكرز وبالإضافة للدكتور سهيل. This mic or do we have another mic? أي حدا عنده أي سؤال؟ نبلش بالدكتورة سائدة.
I'm asking, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Okay, I like, thank you all very much. I'm very interested in education for liberation. I did my PhD about education under occupation, and I think of education as a tool for liberation. I think, what's the model that you are using for using education for liberation? Can you explore more about this? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. So the context of education for liberation essentially looked at having a very constructive political engagement within the realm and the space of education. Within the realm of education. What does it mean for us to have an alternative education project? So I didn't have time to explore it properly in the presentation, but from the adaptation of it in the anti-apartheid struggle in the 1970s, it looked at bringing social and political activities to formal education spaces as well as informal education spaces. For example, there was what we called workers' universities, where workers were given education, formal education in the sense of what we would consider traditional forms of education, but also political education, building workers' workshops in various forms, in storytelling, oral history, performance in the arts, but also bringing that in such a way that it draws on political mobilization, political consciousness building, as well as political education, and bringing that in the broader social structure and what that meant, in the bigger relation towards the struggle against the apartheid system, and how that has carried through post-apartheid system is the question of decolonizing education, the question of fighting for the broader socio-economic struggles within the education system in itself. I mean, people speak about how the model of schooling as us paying fees is exclusionary, and how that takes out people from the broader formal political education system.
Okay, I have I think my voice is loud enough. Okay, I would like to ask about the colonial context.
Okay, I would like to ask a question about the colonial context within the 3 or the 4 actually presentations. We have colonial context within, and a comparative perspective with Palestine. That's what I'd like to hear your perspective on. The colonial context within Chile, South Africa, and the United States relative to the indigenous, because we have varied outcomes in the contemporary setting now. We have what happened with the Mapuche in Chile, South Africa, the way it decolonized then in the settler state, but they were outnumbered in terms of demography, and the indigenous people in the United States, they were outnumbered and now in the reservations. In the Palestinian context, you know, this is always the demographic threat is within the settled colonial context is a big danger for the settler colonials. That's why they brought like 1 million Russians between 90 and 2000. Also the concept of the two-state solution, which is the division of the land. In the context of South Africa, you have the Bantustans that were presented. In the context of the indigenous, you have the reservations. And here we have like cantonization or Bantustanization, and in relation to one-state solution, or the two-state solution, which is for 25 years and has not been an outcome. It's like an endless process, but it does not come to a fruitful outcome. So I would like to see, how do you see this decolonization? In Algeria, they kicked the settler out. In Algeria, the French. In our set, in that, we did not. So what would happen? Okay?
Well, I will start first talking about Chile. The Chilean case is really interesting because the original colonists, the Spanish, were not able to defeat the Mapuche people and therefore recognized their autonomy for many, many years. And they had treaties, trade treaties, there was lots of commerce. It is only when Chile is created that the Mapuche territories are annexed and dispossessed. In this sense, only then we experience settler colonialism, specifically on the whole of the Mapuche territory. It's really interesting because in a sense, the Chilean state always considered itself as one. There was never like a possible two-state solution. It was always one state, thought as mononational, monocultural. And this had as a consequence, on the one hand, as an horrible consequence, the erasure of the Mapuche people. Like they lost their language, now it's being recovered. There are lots of Mapuche scholars, activists, recovering the language, recovering the Mapuche history, struggling for the autonomy within territories. But at the same time, this had a positive consequence, is that all of them have...
Can you please stop? We're not focusing if you keep doing this, right? I don't know what he's doing. He's doing something, and his, my intention is, you know, please stop, and please go ahead, Daniela, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
But had this positive consequence is that the Mapuche ended up having citizenship. And as we know, citizenship is a way to claim rights. And that protects them against the possible violence of the Chilean state. And actually has ended up with the Mapuche people taking cases to the Inter-American Courts of Human Rights and the Chilean state being condemned for the violence against the Mapuche. So this can give us like a positive view of what might be a one-state solution for the Palestinians, in the sense that it would mean Palestinians might acquire the Israeli citizenship and Israeli privilege. And that might be a place to claim rights, possibly. And to possibly from there negotiate an autonomy. For example, the Mapuche are now negotiating the autonomy of their territories, but within the Chilean state, and with the guarantees the citizenship gives them. So now they are trying to follow the model they have in Spain, the Basque people that have an autonomy within the Spanish state. This is a possibility, it's not an absolute. But that's a possible dialogue that could be done with the one-state, two-state solution.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I think before I answer your question, I'd like to say that you know, the question of what we as a people want or what would ultimately happen to us are two different things. And I think if we continue to, you know, imagine this within the issue of the colonial borders that we inherited. I mean, it's the same case in this region, it's the same case in the African context. We had the Berlin, you had Sykes-Picot, and then Balfour and so forth. In the South African context, you know, the young radicals, the me in South Africa, always say that we had been, the leaders sold out. They gave us something we did not want. Yes, the settlers were outnumbered in South Africa because we're the majority, but they still held on to the economic resources. They still control the land. This is only the questions that we are asking now because of the negotiation and what they called the sunset clause. White people still kept the land. They still own about 79% of South African land. Black people still only own about 17% of the land, which was until now, even today, which had been the case since 1913, even before apartheid could be officially announced as a form of government in South Africa. The 1913 Land Act was never really addressed, even though we have a new constitution that allows for the government to expropriate land to bring it back. So at the, the so-called dawn of democracy, Bantu stands were demolished and we all became one country, which means what that apartheid model of trying to create, little states within the bigger states was then dismantled. But this didn't address the socio-economic problems that came with the political models, and this is why this continues even today. I think when you look at the concept of settler colonialism, and I think in the African context, has been captured properly by, for example, Mahmoud Mamdani when he looks at direct and indirect rule. And this also continued. The formal structures of ruling under apartheid in South Africa still carried on today. This is why you have traditional chiefs that control what you call communal land, that white people always, when we speak about them returning back the land, they always say, no, but your chiefs have communal land, even though we don't have any access to that. And the chiefs themselves don't actually even own the land. And they also continue the displacement of people and essentially reproducing the same mechanisms of the apartheid government.
Thank you.
Just a very brief response. In the United States, the relationship of indigenous nations to the U.S. government is, in my opinion, entirely context dependent. But the two ways that I can kind of break it down is that there are roughly 562 tribes that have federal recognition from the U.S. government. In other words, the United States federal government recognizes a nation-to-nation relationship with those tribes. They're understood, according to the letter of the law, to be sovereign nations. The trouble with that is that, in terms of your kind of second half of your question with what I kind of wanted to pull out of what you were saying was this question of sovereignty, right? So those tribes which are federally recognized are eligible to inhabit certain lands, roughly a 10% fraction of their original tribal territories, right? And so within those borders, they theoretically have something like sovereignty, but that issue of sovereignty is kind of considered a myth by most Native peoples. And then you kind of transfer that over to, for example, the state of California where I teach, and sort of what I was talking about in terms of the Ohlone Nation that exists in the Bay Area, who do not have federal recognition and therefore are not eligible to sovereign territory, first of all, and the question of self-determination in terms of the way that the land is used and the sort of respect that is or isn't given to burial territories and so on, those rights don't apply to them. And so when we're asking this question of sovereignty in relationship to a global superpower like the United States, we also have to kind of think about the ways that the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, and kind of the implementation of it don't always align for Native nations. So I would be very skeptical of something like the U.S. Respecting Native sovereignty in any context, as I think we can kind of make that connection to here as well. And maybe you want to talk about that in terms of Standing Rock.
Yeah, so the United States does not respect Native sovereignty at all. So we can see that through, for example, when resources on indigenous nations are sought after, like by U.S. law, supposedly the U.S. is supposed to consult with tribal nations, and it doesn't happen, right? So like consultation is just like talking with the community and getting their opinions, basically. And it doesn't necessarily mean getting permission, right? So they could still have a meeting with the tribal nations, but not take their opinions into account when making the decision to frack and drill. But I mean, I could get into this more, but I think we're cut on time, so I'm gonna end there.
Thank you.
So thank you all, and a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much. Sorry for being ahead of time. We're just going to move to the next session, which is going to be moderated by Dr. Sufian. Thank you.
Great.
مرة ما تجي. يلا نستوفي إن شاء الله.